Hi everyone, this is Neil. What I thought I'd do for you this week is do a little set of voiceover slides and talk a bit about really trying to get to grips with reading at master's level. Hoping to really try and help you with this because to be absolutely real about it, this is hard. And it's absolutely okay to find this hard. No one is meant near the beginning of the PG cert to already know how to do this. If you already know how to do it, you wouldn't need to be on the course, would you? This is one of the most important skills, this and writing, and of course, overwhelmingly, like learning to teach really effectively. These are some of the skills that the whole point is that the course is trying to teach you. So if you're finding this really hard right now, or you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed about it, I'd really say to you, look, don't worry, that's completely normal, and in a way, you're meant to be finding it hard right now. Okay, it's also okay to find having to do this reading a complete pain in the ass because it's hard work, you know? And most of us don't naturally want to spend our time sitting down and doing something that's really hard and really difficult. So, I know there's an element where we have to sit down and just make ourselves do this, and that's fine. However, being real in sort of the other direction, it's not okay not to do it. And the reason it's not okay not to do it is because it's not like you can or you can't now and you never will be able to. The point about this is it's a skill, and it's a skill we can all develop. And what I'm going to try and help you begin to do in today's slides and then over the coming weeks is really help you develop this skill. And it's an amazing skill to have, I tell you. I'm really grateful for the fact that I learned how to read. It's helped me enormously, professionally and personally. And it matters, it really matters that we learn this skill because, the more we read, the better informed we are, and the better informed we are, the more capable we are of acting really well as professionals. So, there's a context here of saying, if it feels difficult, if it feels new, if you're feeling a little bit daunted, don't worry, you're at the beginning of learning a skill. It reminds me a bit of when I first came to BIM, and I realised, looking back now, I had no idea how to listen to music. And I would sit in people's classes and they'd be talking about things that they'd just, the critical listening classes, they'd be talking about things they'd just heard, they'd play a track and students would discuss it. And I'd find myself thinking, oh my God, I didn't hear any of those things because I didn't at that point know how to listen to, different aspects of a piece of music simultaneously and break them down in my head and put them back together. And I've learned to do that just from sitting in observing lessons. And, to me, that's added so much pleasure to my music listening. And I think really this is the same thing. I hope it's going to add confidence, but also pleasure to your reading. Now, we're talking really about critical reading, and as you'll know from the PG Cert session on this, what we're really talking about is reading for conversation, not content. In other words, we're trying to start to read in a different kind of a way. This is what's called a threshold concept. It's a kind of a step up from what you've done before. So when we're reading now, we're not looking at the thing we're reading and going, right, what's all the things that the author said and sort of writing them down as if they're some kind of gospel truth. We're reading to kind of understand where the author's coming from and have a really clear opinion in our own minds about what we think about that. So as we're reading, it's almost like the text we're reading could be somebody who's talking to us, and we're not just listening to them passively, we're having a conversation. And it's a very specific kind of conversation. What you need to be able to do, what we need to be able to do when we read something academic for this course is two things when we've finished reading it. We need to be able to summarise what the author's argument was. What are they trying to convince us of? What is their argument? And we need to know exactly what we think about it and why. Once you can do that, the job is done, okay? But in order to do that, to be able to summarise their argument and know what we think about it, our brains need to be on throughout the reading time. And if you realise, and I have this experience, you all have this experience, that you've got to the end of a page and actually it's just turned into words, and you get to the bottom of the page and you think, I have no idea what I just read, then you need to put it down and then come back to it because you need to be reading when you're able to really concentrate. Now, the thing I'm going to suggest to you, which I hope will be helpful, is that when we're doing this reading, we need to read with two separate eyes, which I'm going to describe shortly. We need to have an academic eye and we need to have a professional eye because we're looking for two different things through our reading, okay? So our academic eye is looking for the argument. What is the argument? How would you summarise it? What is it that the authors are trying to convince us of? That's the first thing we're looking for. The second thing we're looking for is, okay, how are they making their argument? How well are they making it? How convincing are they? And why do I think that? And then the third thing is then coming back to ourselves and going, right, what do I think about this? What's my opinion about their argument? So what's their argument? How well are they making it? And what do I think about their argument? And our professional eye is looking for something a little bit different. The first thing our professional eye is looking for is, okay, what can I get out of this reading that's going to make me better informed as a professional? What can I learn from this that I can actually put to use in a practical way? I kind of quite like theory, I'm quite interested in theory, but ultimately what I'm really interested in is practice. So anything I read, I want to know, how can I use this and how can I better what I'm doing as a professional, because I've now learned something from this that I can use in a real way. So that's then you looking at the text, and then similarly to the academic eye, we then come back to ourselves again and go, okay, so what I'm reading, how does this relate to my own experience in my teaching and my own specific teaching context? You'll often read things which are general theories of teaching, and because they're general, they may not apply quite in the way that you're reading it to your own teaching. So I always want to say to myself, have I found this to be true? Have I got examples of the thing they're talking about where I've seen that happen? Have I got examples of the thing they're talking about where I've seen something different happen? And this is part then of us reading critically, because we're thinking, how does this general theory fit in my specific context? And what would I say about that? Would I say, yes, it fits, and here's some examples? Would I say, it fits sometimes and sometimes it doesn't, and this is why? Would I say, actually, no, in my particular situation, this doesn't fit, and this is why? And all of this is critical thinking, because we're relating what we're reading to our own specific set of experiences. Now, when I'm going about tackling a piece of reading, I think there are 3 stages. Okay, I'm going to take you through these 3 stages and the 2 different eyes in relationship to the Donald Shern article that we're focusing on this week. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I would be thinking while I'm reading it myself. And the first stage of reading is just orientating ourselves to the text. This is like the skim phase of SQ3R. So in other words, I'm just looking at the thing going, okay, what's this about? Why might I want to read this? And do I have any specific questions in my mind? So I'm kind of just preparing myself to read and preparing myself to read very actively. Then I read with both my eyes, my academic eye and my professional eye. To be honest with you, what I would probably do at this stage of you really learning to do this well is I would probably read things twice, and I would read it once just with the academic filter on and once just with the professional filter on. And you want to do that probably at least a day apart so that your brain can reset itself. When you become more skilled at doing this, you'll be able to read with both eyes simultaneously. But I think in order to learn the skill and to practice, it's best to practice by doing them one by one. The other thing I would say at this point as well is that some texts, it's not always going to be like 50% academic and 50% professional, the things you want to pay your attention to. Some texts you'll find that the academic lens shows you a lot more. Other texts you'll find that the professional lens shows you a lot more. That's fine, they don't have to be balanced, it's just you've got to look through both of them. And the third stage of reading is that I need to then make myself a really good record of my reading that I can use later. And I'm going to show you towards the end of this presentation what elements I think you need to have in a really good record of your reading. So, the first phase is that I'm going to orientate myself towards the text, and really that's about figuring out 3 different things. What am I about to read? What's the content? What kind of article is it? What's my purpose in reading it? What do I want to get out of reading this? What's the point of reading it? And then what initial questions do I have? Okay. So if I'm orientating myself towards Shern's text, the first thing, and this is going to sound really obvious, but the first thing is to actually have a bit of a think about the title and the context. It's easy just to kind of go, oh, educating the reflective practitioner and move on. But just, I need to think to myself, educating the reflective practitioner, what does that mean? Oh, okay. So he's thinking of me as a teacher, as a practitioner, someone who's a professional, but someone who's always reflecting on what they do. Yeah, I'm into that. We do that on the PG Cert the whole time, fine. So then how do you educate someone to be good at that? So immediately I'm quite interested in that, because it's like, well, that's actually one of my jobs, is to try and educate people to be reflective professionals. There's going to be something for me in this article that is going to be interesting. Now, I should say at this point, right, everyone reading this article, because it's all about your conversation with the article, you're all going to have different conversations. So all the things I'm about to say about this article are just me reading it from my perspective. It's not going to be the same as the way in which you're going to read it from your perspective. And if we have different perspectives and there's things that I say that you disagree with, that doesn't make me right or you wrong, or you right and me wrong. It just means that we have different perspectives because we're different critical readers. And that's absolutely fine. In fact, that's exactly as it should be. Okay? So if I'm orientating myself towards the text, the first thing I'm going to look at is the first paragraph or the first couple of paragraphs. In an academic article, you'll know there's an abstract, and the abstract will just summarise what the whole article is going to be about. If you read the first couple of paragraphs, say twice, and you still don't know what the article's about, chances are that's not your problem as a reader. Chances are it's just not been very clearly written, okay? So here's the first paragraph from the Shern, and I'm reading this now kind of before I start even thinking about the article, with the intention of going, right, what is this telling me about what's coming up? Because I can then prepare myself for what's coming up. And if you look at this page, you'll see, first of all, let's go to the first bit of bold type, because he tells us that certain fundamental questions keep coming up. And this is telling us that actually these are the questions he's going to be writing about in this article. So that's good. So what are they? The questions are, what are the competences that teachers should be trying to help the students acquire? Okay, so what should we be teaching students? That's an interesting question. What kinds of knowledge and what sort of know-how should teachers have in order to do their jobs well? And I'm thinking, okay, so these links. So what should teachers teach the kids? What kind of knowledge do teachers need to have in order to do that? And then what kind of education is most likely to help teachers do it? And I'm thinking, oh, right, that's really interesting. Now, I think at this point, it's really worth not carrying on with your reading until you also have a bit of a think, because I'd want to have a think at this point and go, all right, so before I even read this and get influenced by what he's saying, what do I think about those questions? What's my opinion about those questions? And I'd often like just jot it down, because if I'm going to have a conversation, I need to be able to hold my own ground a little bit. So rather than just going, oh, he's going to tell me the answers, it's like, no, he's just going to tell me his opinion. So what do I think the answers are? And it really helps me then when I'm reading to know what my opinion is, because then as I'm reading the article, I'll notice whether my opinion is being challenged, and then I might change my mind, or whether it's being supported, or whether it's being modified in some kind of a way. So it's like I know where I'm at in the conversation all the way through. The other thing I notice, and it's very helpful actually the way that this text has been produced, is that there's a bit that's been underlined, and I think, okay, well clearly this is going to be important in some way. And he writes, in this talk, I want to talk about a version of the epistemology of practice. And I'm thinking, epistemology of practice, right. We've hit a kind of a buzzwordy expression. Just ignore that noise in the background. That's Trevor rustling. The epistemology, he's looking very apologetic now. We're in a hotel room in Seville. It's all right, you carry on rustling, it's fine. The epistemology of practice. So epistemology, I know that means a theory of knowledge. So it's a theory of knowledge about practice. Oh, okay. So he's going to be writing about what do we know about how to practice as professionals. Well, that's cool. That links to the questions above. I understand that. And he's going to say that there's two forms of knowledge about practice. One is school knowledge and one is reflection in action. I don't know at this point in my reading what he means by school knowledge, and I don't know what he means by reflection in action, but I realise that that's somehow going to be at the heart of his argument. There's going to be that he's going to make an argument. There's two different ways of thinking about what we do, thinking about the knowledge that we use as teachers. One is school knowledge, one is reflection in action. So this is now orientating me because I know that's his key argument. It's going to be something about that. So that's the main theme I need to be looking for while I read. Keep that theme in my mind while I'm reading, because that's going to be the heart of what he's saying. And if I want to be able to summarise his argument at the end, I need to keep in front of my attention what is his argument about school knowledge, what is it, what is argument about reflection in action, what is it, how do the two things go together, what's his opinion about them. That's going to be my summary of whatever his argument is going to be. Yeah. And then at this point as well, I would then think, are there any things I'm particularly interested in that? Any questions I've got? And I jot down some questions for myself, because the other way in which we read actively is not only being aware of what our opinion is before we read, so we can relate the reading to our opinion and our experience. The other way of reading actively is to have some specific questions in mind, okay? So to me, that now has set me up to be ready to read this in a very engaged way. And actually, I'm feeling really interested now, because I'm thinking, yeah, these are quite interesting questions. I'm up for reading this. So as I go into my reading now, the first thing I'm going to be doing, and maybe if you're going to read it twice, make this the first reading, is my academic eye, right? And my academic eye is looking for, what's the argument? How's it being made? And how convincing am I finding it? Now, if we look at just this little excerpt from the second page of Shern's article, this is quite characteristic of how he makes his argument throughout this text. You will notice, now it was a speech, so there's a bit of context here. He was given as a speech, but you will notice all the way through this, he's not quoting sources. There's no footnotes, there's no bibliography, there's no Harvard referencing appearing anywhere. So how's he making his argument? Well, actually, what he does is he makes his argument by giving us examples. So if you look at the first paragraph here, he's talking about a particular view of knowledge, that knowledge is a product and that things are very certain, and that's what teachers, well, that's what some people, he disagrees, of course, that's what some people think teachers should be interested in and should be transmitting, is this very firm, clear knowledge, and he's wanting to oppose that. So the first thing he's saying in this paragraph is, well, there is a view that this is how knowledge works. And I'm immediately thinking, well, yes, I'm aware that's a view. If this is how knowledge works, I already have an opinion on it. I don't think knowledge does work like that, but that's fine. And I'm aware that this point of view about this is how knowledge works gets put forward quite a lot. And it gets put forward by people like Ed Hirsch and Michael Gove and Nicky Morgan and all these kind of people. So I'm aware that that's a view out there. That's fine. And he then backs up this argument from about 6 lines down, where he then says, and let me tell you a story. And then he talks a little bit about Vygotsky. By the way, don't get thrown if you suddenly find that in the middle of an article people are throwing in names you're not familiar with. Vygotsky, actually, you'll know all about by the end of next term. It's just you haven't got there yet. So don't be worried about the names and things. That's something that you'll build up over time. So then you get this little story about the peasant and the tools and the log and everything, and it's an example. Now at that point I'm thinking, just how's he making his argument? Well, the answer is he's making his argument by giving an example. What do I think about that? Well, that could be dodgy, couldn't it? Because you can always find an example to make any kind of argument. You think about the media at the moment. The right-wing newspapers are saying, oh dear, we shouldn't have refugees are really awful. And then there'll be some story of somebody who came in as a refugee and it turned out that they were a terrorist, or it turned out that they were committing crimes or whatever, and that one example is then meant to prove the point that having refugees is a bad idea. In the left-wing press, you'll get people saying, no, this is our moral responsibility. We should be looking after and supporting refugees because they're fellow human beings, and they will then probably argue basically in the same structural way, because they'll tell you a story about someone who's come from awful conditions and very bravely arrived in the UK and is now doing really wonderful things in the country. Either way, it's just one example trying to prop up an argument. And as soon as I see that, I'm thinking, to me, that doesn't make a strong argument. So whether or not I agree with Schoen, and it happens that I do, I'm also acknowledging I don't think the argument is being made well, because he's basing it on single examples and stories. Now, actually, across the whole article, there are several stories that he uses, so he is beginning to build things up, but I'm very aware that he's doing it on the basis of stories rather than on the basis of any other broader research. So as soon as somebody's arguing from example, what I then start thinking in my mind is, well, what about examples that I've seen in my own experience? Have I seen examples that go with this? Have I seen examples that go against this? And that, again, is keeping me going as part of the whole reading for conversation. Yeah. So anytime you see someone arguing with a story or an example, pause and think about your own examples that you might use in that place. Then my second bit of reading, of course, is I'm going to be reading with a professional eye, and the question there is, right, what can I learn that's going to help me develop as a professional, and how does this reading relate to my own professional practice? So on page 6, I notice, now what I'm going to notice as a professional may be different from you, right? Because I'm reading this from the point of view of being somebody who trains teachers. So I'm interested in how do you train teachers to become reflective professionals. You're reading it probably from the point of view of people who are in the process of becoming teachers. So your interest might be more along the lines of, well, how do I become a reflective professional? Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because we then actually have different questions that we would use as our starting points, and that means that we're going to be looking at different things and having different kinds of conversations. Again, that's great. There's many different kinds of conversations you can have with the text. So he says halfway through this, the challenge to professional schools is the challenge of educating for artistry, and he's been talking over the previous pages about this idea of artistry being knowledge that you're able to use and refine in the moment of using it. So me being able to work out while I'm teaching what's going on in the classroom. Oh dear, that's not working. Oh, why don't I think that's working? Oh, I think it's for this reason. Right, let's try that. So it's knowledge that is just being generated in the moment of my own practice. And he says, right, we need to think about how do we help people acquire that knowledge. Now I'm really perky at this point. I'm thinking that's really, really interesting. And then I'm about to become frustrated because he doesn't actually give any concrete examples. And I remember somebody blogged about this recently and said they were reading Biggs and Tang and they were great ideas, but you were just really frustrated that they didn't come up with any concrete ways of saying, well, how would you make these ideas happen? How would you make them happen in practice? So right now, there is no ideas here about how to actually do this education for artistry. Now that I've noticed that, that's a sort of a niggle, that's a little frustration, and it's in the corner of my mind. And I come back to it 3 pages later because finally, on page 9, and this is my professional eye, he does suggest, in very broad brushstrokes and in not much detail, how he thinks you would educate for artistry. So it's taken me 3 pages. I've had to wait, but finally he comes back to it and he talks about a specific kind of coaching, which he says is the best way of helping educate for artistry, which is, always been looking at a specific problem. Always looking at that problem in the context of the actual teaching in the classroom, and then working with someone in a way which helps them not be defensive or not feel like they're being told what to do, but feel more like you're there as an ally, helping them work it out for themselves. And I quite like that, but it's taken a while to get to. So then, with my professional eye, I'm realising, right, this is something that I can think about. How do I do this in practice? Because this is actually going to help me maybe be more effective as a teacher educator. And then the second question, how does it relate to my own practice? Well, actually, I'm also a coach, and I do have a different view of coaching from the view that he's putting forward here. So as part of my criticism, I would be wanting to say, I don't think he's quite grasped coaching in the way that I coach it. So it goes both ways, yeah. Right, and then the final thing that I need to think about, having done my reading and made some notes as I've gone along, is I need a really good record of this. And I need it for 2 reasons. One, if you get into the habit of making the kind of record of your reading that I'm about to suggest, you will know that you've done every piece of reading to the highest standard, because making the record is actually a way of forcing yourself to get your own thinking really clear, so you know what you think about it before you move on, and that's good because you've maximised the usefulness of your reading time then. But the other reason to make a good record is once you've made it, you know the job is done. And you're not thinking, oh, did I read it? Did I read it properly? Should I maybe go back and read it again? It's like, no, it's done. So a really good reading record, I think, has a certain number of elements. I mean, you can add other things as well, and you can do it in different ways, but these are the elements I think you need. So the first thing you need is the bibliographic details. So get your correct Harvard reference down for what is this thing that I just read, because if I want to quote it in my essay, because the reason for having a good reading record is both so that you've read it in the moment, but also so that it's there, because you're going to need all this stuff when you come to writing your assignments, because you're going to have to be quoting and using what you've read as part of your assignment. So make sure you've got the bibliographic details so that if you're going to quote from this in your essay, you've got all your Harvard reference there. The other thing I do at that point is I just make a note for myself. If I want to read this again or find it again, where is it? If I've got a PDF of it, where have I saved it on my computer? If I found it in the library, I'll write down for myself what is the shelf mark of where it is in the library. So I'm not faffing about having to find the whole thing again. I can go straight to it if I need to. The next thing is that I need to have my own paraphrase, my own summary of what is the author's argument. If it's an academic article, this kind of length, Schoen's article, 10 sides of A4, 1 or 2 paragraphs maximum where I summarise this is what his argument is. If it's a chapter from a book, you quite often notice, say in Biggs and Tang or Hattie, that the chapters might have 3 or 4 different subjects within them, 3 or 4 phases, and you can tell that because of the way they use the different subheadings throughout. In that case, I'd probably do a little summary or a paraphrase of each section of the chapter. So don't read the whole chapter and think, oh my God, I can't remember what happened on page 1. I'm 50 pages further down. As you get through each particular phase of the chapter, do your little summary then, okay, your paraphrase of the author's argument. So that, again, in the essay, don't forget, there's 2 things you might be wanting to do with things you've read. You might be wanting to directly quote, which is one thing, or you might want to just summarise what their argument was. So that's why having this paraphrase, again, is really, really important. It shows that you've really had a good conversation with the text, but you've got that there if you want to be able to refer to it later. Then I write down, okay, so what's my opinion about it? What do I think are the strengths and weaknesses of the argument? Did I think of other examples that didn't really fit from my own experience? Jot those down now because, again, they're there to trigger me later on. And this is important. I use a different colour. It's very easy when you come back to your notes 6 months later, unless you're very, very clear, to get confused between what they thought and what you thought. So in some way, you need to make sure that there is no way you can get confused between what was your summary of their argument and then what's your own opinion. And the easiest way I find to do that is, for myself, the way my brain works, I use different colours or just do different subheadings within your notes. But keep those two things, their argument and your opinion, absolutely 100% separate so that you cannot muddle them up later on. The other thing I like to record is what I call the golden nuggets. Just a few little ideas as I was going through. I think, oh, that's really interesting, or I like that, or I didn't know that, or that's a great idea. So I just kind of capture the little golden nuggets for myself. Now, when you think about it, a lot of people, I think, in their note taking from their reading as undergraduates, probably that's the only bit they do. They do the golden nuggets bit. They don't do the three things above, which I think are really more important. And in fact, they don't really pick out the golden nuggets. They just write down a bunch of stuff that interests them as they're reading it. So they've got golden nuggets and silver nuggets and bronze nuggets and probably lead nuggets as well. So if you get the bits above done properly, then you'll be able to focus in on the really important, 3 to 5 maximum. Don't overwhelm yourself with information, but the stuff that you just think is really nice, interesting little nuggets. The other thing I get down at this point as well is I'll pick out 3 to 5 direct quotations, things that I think are interesting, summarise the argument, and might well be things that I would want to quote in an assignment. So pick out 3 to 5 direct quotations, make sure that for each one you've got the full reference, the page number, yada yada, and double check them, right? Make sure that you have got them absolutely word for word. It's amazingly easy to transcribe something that you're reading and slightly get a word wrong or the punctuation wrong, and actually know you have to be on it. Double check it and make sure that you've got all of those references absolutely accurate, and then your job is done and you can put that thing away. And the thing is, you never, unless you particularly want to, or whatever, you never need to read that again, because everything you need to get out of your reading you have got at that point. Okay, I hope that was helpful.